welcome to this update on the Yarslow model railway. I thought I'd bring you indoors for a quick 5-minute chat before we got ourselves out into the shed. Now, I wanted to make 2 points, firstly about this month's update and secondly about the channel in generally. Firstly about this month's update, there's been a bit of activity but not as much as I would hope for 2 reasons. One, it's been a busy month doing things other than working in the shed. And secondly, because I've had a month of consolidation. There's been a load of jobs that I should have done and I haven't done, like painting the shed, sorting out the control panel, tidying up, organising bits and pieces, ordering some things that I need. So I've been going through that process really to get me to where I should have been, and I was too keen to get tracked down and see something moving, and I'd kind of skipped a couple of steps, so I've gone back and I've put those right. Secondly, the channel itself. I've never pretended that this channel is going to be a how to build a model railway. There are plenty of people in YouTube land who do that better than I do. They explain things better than I do. YouTube does not need yet another average modeler telling you how to lay track, build baseboards, etc, etc. So that's not what this channel is about. What I've tried to do with this channel is to explain why I'm doing things and perhaps give you a bit of insight into the background. There's nothing worse when you're starting out to read an article or to hear an audio or to watch a video. The chap says, "Oh, I do this in the usual way." That means absolutely nothing if you don't know what the usual way is. So what I'm trying to do is to give you an insight to some of the background stuff to get you to the start line and to get you moving forwards. The other thing with this channel is that I'm very much focusing, as you'd expect, on my layout. The fact that I do things a certain way for my layout. I model in DC, I use plywood baseboard tops, I use code 75 track. It doesn't mean that's what you need to do. That means that's what I'm doing. You can take what I do, you can listen to what I say, and you can think to yourself, that's good, or no, I'm going to do it slightly differently. And that's fine. I'm not precious about any of the things I do or any of the ideas I have. If you've got a better idea, then you carry on and using it. This is really just a look into my world and to give you an idea of what I'm doing. Okay, let's get ourselves out into the shed. Before I do that, a massive thank you to all those people who have subscribed. If you're new to the channel, do hit the subscribe button, which is down here somewhere, I think, on the screen. Hit the notification bell so that when videos are uploaded, you get a notification. What I'm trying to do is to do a video or an update towards the end of each month, and then in the middle of the month I'm doing the continuing series of the bite-sized bits. So you would have seen the last one, which is on catch points and trap points. There's a few others coming. Now, having said what I've just said, 1 or 2 of those are on how to do things, because I've been specifically asked to explain how I do things. So within the context of the points I've just made, I'll give you an idea of how I do it. There are other ways, but I'll show you how I do it. So enough chat, let's get out in the shed. And here we are. The first and most obvious change is that I've painted the upper shed blue. This is representing sky, obviously. And what's going to happen going forward is that I'm going to use my best O-level art skills to paint some clouds into the background along here. I'm not going to worry about the roof, but I shall worry about the background here, so that you get a background to the railway. The other big development is in the scope of the track. We've seen in a previous video that I had laid down to the junction of the branch. There's that back siding, the box of point motors is where the signal box is going to be. But you can see now that I have laid the goods yard here as ever under piles of stuff. That is the goods yard, and I have now laid both the platforms and the lines through the platform, loop line. And here are the main lines on the right here and the loop lines on the left running through. You can see where I've marked the platforms out, running round and eventually off to Yarslow. So on the right here, this point here is going to, this is the exchange sidings for the branch, and the goods yard for Yarslow are these lines here. It's something of a quite different story looking the other way, because this is the board across the door, and as yet it's just all in planning. So this is my next job. This is a new curve point. The one that I was going to put in here was looking a little bit tired. So they're the two lines that come from the storage sidings. This is the facing crossover, which technically doesn't exist but needs to exist to make the cartridge system work. So this point here and this point here aren't fixed down, and obviously you need motors. The main line then comes across at an angle driven by that curve point. This is the trailing crossover, and eventually the point that leads through the trap into those two loop lines. And you can see from the run round of the loop platform, this point here and this point here is going to lead to the old wagon works, which is now the permanent way yard. Now I've been getting some feedback, some a bit more subtle than others, about the wiring of this control panel. One or two of you thought that the wiring was pretty rough, and the truth of it is, it probably was. So I've been having a bit of a prune, and all this wiring has been removed out of the back of the panel, and more importantly, these tag strip units, 5 of them, that were creating all sorts of problems. So you will know what this looked like before, and this is what it looks like now. You can see that what I've done is to directly wire the wires coming out of the switches and the lights directly into the wire that's coming out the bottom of the baseboard. So I've now got all the red wires coming out of this aperture, all the black ones out of that aperture, and so on and so forth. Reds and blues separated up here. Everything is neat and tidy, and hopefully no more adverse feedback. And you can see when viewed from the side that there's a lot less fuss, and there's far less interference with the rails and the trains that are going to run in the foreground. Now there are some pluses and minuses in doing this. The big plus is that I've now lost some unreliability issues with some of the points. They all change exactly when I want them to. Before there were 1 or 2 that were a little bit dodgy, and that's probably because the wiring onto the tag strip, there was probably 1 or 2 dodgy joints. Bearing in mind there were nearly 350 joints in the back of this thing, there's no real surprise that 1 or 2 were a little bit wobbly. The downside is that I was going to replicate this panel over near Yarslow. The idea was that when I was sitting over here at my desk, that panel would be duplicated in front of me so that I could just call off trains to appear when I wanted them on the layout. And that's now not going to be possible because I can't tap in to those hardwired connections to replicate the panel over here. In any event, I don't see that as a major problem, because all I've got to do if I want to change trains is to walk from the desk, which is going to be broadly where that pile of junk is, around the peninsula and over to here. Well, that'll give me some exercise, so no big deal. Now, if you were watching my video on track points and catch points, you would have heard me make the observation that some people would consider that just to be the waste of another piece of track and yet another point motor. But I just want to point out, if you're using seat motors, that the PM1 is the point motor with the switch. That's that one. But there is, within the range, just an ordinary point motor, PM2. And they look the same, but they actually don't have the switch mechanism to switch the frogs, and therefore the two different types, and actually two different prices. The ones without the switches, the PM2s, are several pounds cheaper than the PM1s, which come with a switch. Obviously, if you're using catch points and track points, there is no frog polarity to change, and therefore you can get away with using the ordinary PM2. You don't need a switch, and therefore they're cheaper. Now, whatever size layout you're going to build, it makes sense to have all the necessary bits and pieces before you start to build. So in my case, I've got rail joiners and track pins and insulated joiners and point motors. And in my track box, I've got all the necessary point work for Trinity Square and the branch, carefully labelled so I don't use it for the wrong thing. All my reels of wire, all the different various colours for all of the various conventions are all here. The mess in the top, incidentally, is still the fallout from having rewired the control panel. And I've got my electrical box of tag strip, of CDUs, switches, LEDs, and all sorts of other stuff waiting to be used. And that means that when I come to do a section like this, where I'm laying points, I've got some track to lay, the process follows the same sort of flow. You can see that I tend to draw all over the boards. There's an awful lot of pencil marks have been made, most of them in the wrong place. Before I get to where the track is going to go, I then carefully mark it out, and then I know that I've got the right track, the pins, the joiners. I can make all of the wire connections that I want to in the right colours. Obviously I've got the board, I've got the screws to screw down the board, and the whole thing can progress at a reasonable rate. I haven't got a lot of time standing around waiting for things to come in the post. So even for a layout of this size, even if you're building a small layout, a bit of forward planning, working out what you're going to need and making sure that you've got all that in hand before you start does make the job an awful lot easier. A number of people have asked me about my toolkit and how many tools I've got and what I use to build the railway. And actually the toolkit is surprisingly small, bearing in mind at this stage I'm just track laying. In the previous video I talked about my track laying kit, some of which you can see here, and this is the expanded version really for doing everything I'm doing now. The key for starters are rulers, decent measuring equipment, squares, long rulers, shorter rulers, squares, levels, just to make sure that all of the planning you do is as accurate as you can get it. I make cardboard templates when the track setter gauges don't do what I need them to do. If you don't have a set of track setter gauges and you're building a layout anything bigger than really a small terminus or a small through station, then I would strongly recommend that you buy yourself a set. They really are useful. They're not perfect. I would have to say that one thing that would make them better would be if they were calibrated in perhaps 5-degree stages, so that if you had on your plan a curve that had to go for, say, even 12 degrees, which is the standard turnout deflection, if you had two lines that were 12 degrees apart, you could work out how much of a curve you needed to make up that 12 degrees. Now, if you're a mathematician, that's an easy thing to do, because you can work out the circumference of a circle, 2 pi r. You can work out what the radius is, that's r, multiply 2 times pi, which is 3.147, times the radius, and you get the total distance all the way around the outside of the circle. Divide that by 360, and that's how long you get for each degree. So if you are working, for argument's sake, on the 60-inch radius, you work out how long 1 degree would be. You can measure that off with your ruler and put 2 lines on here, and then you can work out, if you've got a 3-degree curve or a 12-degree curve, how long that section of track ought to be. If you're not a mathematician, I've probably lost you totally, but it's worth giving that some thought so that you can mark your track setters, and perhaps you can make some marks on the back. That brings us through rulers onto general tools, files, stabbers and pointers, things to make marks in the board, various drills that you're going to need, pliers, hammers, a decent blade, don't try and do the job with a Stanley, cutters, testers by all means. This is just a continuity tester, so that if you're that's the effect you get. That helps you with continuity of making sure you've got your frog polarities right. This is a little whizzy device that just takes the end off wire. You just bosh and it strips the end of a wire. That's just me being lazy. Lots of pencils, pencil sharpener, definite, markers and rulers and all the stuff that you normally used to have. So it's not an expensive toolkit. It's not something that's going to cost you an arm and a leg to put together, but basic tools like this are really useful. Things like this, small pairs of pliers that I use just for track pins, I think I bought those in a pound shop, so you don't need to spend a lot of money. Yes, if you're going to buy Xeron track cutters, very useful things to have and worth spending the money for. Not worth spending pounds and pounds and pounds. Buy yourself a cheap hammer, buy yourself some cheap files and cheap stabbers. Cheap drills, I wouldn't personally buy cheap drills, but if you're only drilling a little bit of plywood and you've only got a little bit to do, there's nothing wrong with a cheap set of drills. Finally, a must-have and a nice-to-have. The must-have is a decent soldering iron. This is an Antex iron, 18 watt with a 3mm tip, a decent station. That is perfect for doing wiring, connecting wire to the track. Absolutely perfect, nothing wrong with that whatsoever. The tip is small enough, works perfectly well. I did have a bigger iron before, didn't need that. This is absolutely wonderful. The nice to have, hot glue gun. This is only a cheap one. I think this was probably less than a £5. The glue sticks came with it, and this is great for sticking tag strip to the baseboard or all sorts of other things being stuck down. You don't realise how useful these things are till you've got one. Certainly worth the investment. The next thing which falls into the must-have, nice-to-have is a decent drill. Now, I bought myself a DeWalt. You don't need to have a DeWalt or a Makita or anything fancy. You can buy a basic Black & Decker or a basic DIY shed own, but I find anything like this to be vital. 2 speeds, so you've got a drill and a screwdriver, reversible. It's got a clutch so that you can, if you're doing screwdrivering, you don't drive the screws straight through the material. It will stop. Rechargeable, have a spare battery, have that charged up all the time. Useful must-have thing. For track laying, the one thing I use more than anything is the mirror. So if you're trying to work out whether your curves are nice and flowing, the mirror will give you that. So whatever it is that you're trying to work out, your flow through point work, use the mirror. Saves trying to get your eye down on the baseboard. Really, really useful bit of kit. And a little bit of hard work joins the tracks up to make a complete loop. I've done the wiring for the down line, which is the inside of the two tracks. Needs a little bit of jerry rigging here with a few crocodile clips, but it does mean that noise you can hear in the background is, for the first time, a train circulating on the Yarslow layout. The track is filthy, which is why it's on quite high power. But the Class 20 with my old coal wagon and one of the new Hornby four-wheelers. There she goes, passing the training crossover, the junction of the branch, around that big curve at the end, past the new V1 that arrived yesterday. Shout out to Chester Model Centre, thank you for your dealings. And here she comes on the avoiding line of the storage sidings. All the rubbish just dumped out the way to clear the line. Past Mount Snowdon in polystyrene. And let's recall the time, it's 20 past 12, sorry, 20 past 11. A momentous day. I'll also give a very quick mention to the fact that we have now taken delivery of a pair of J27s from Oxford Rail. I have got 65837 and 65817. They've only got a short bit of track to run on here, but I have to say they are very good. I've not had anything from Oxford Rail before, certainly not engines. The rolling stock's fine, but in terms of the locomotives, I've not had any engines from them before. I've put them on the test track here and run them up and down for 6 feet, and they run absolutely fine. I've also taken delivery of another Q6. Now I've got a Q6, it makes some funny noises, but it's very powerful and very strong and not a bad runner. This one doesn't make any funny noises and actually is not a very good runner at all. So what I'm going to need to do is to take this to my railway club, where the test track is about the same size as my shed, and give it a run for half an hour. I have given it an oil and a check over. It looks lovely. If I can get it running as well as it looks, then I'll have a pair of Q6s on the fleet and I will be happy bunny. So there you are, my friends. I can tell you no more. There's nothing else to tell. That brings this update to an end. A huge thank you to all those people who have subscribed. If you're new to the channel and you haven't subscribed, there's a subscription button down here somewhere, and there's a little bell icon. Hit that so whenever more videos appear, you'll be notified. You're very welcome to come and join the party. There'll be another quick bite video coming at you very soon, and another update when we hopefully will see lots of trains running and a bit more progress. Until then, stay safe. I'll see you soon.